Imagine a scenario for a second. You have a single, uninvited guest at a wedding.
Just one person.
Right, just one snub. But this one snub, it kicks off a chain reaction that is so catastrophic, it results in, like, a massive 10-year global war, the burning of an entire civilization to ash, and a king literally lost at sea for another decade just trying to get home. I mean, if you saw that in a textbook, you would probably think it was a typo.
It sounds completely absurd on its face, honestly, because, in modern times, we are really conditioned to look for these massive geopolitical shifts to explain things.
Yeah, or like economic collapses.
Exactly, or severe resource scarcity as the trigger for a decade-long conflict. We crave logical, systemic causes for monumental human tragedies. We just don't want to believe that a global catastrophe could start over, well, a party invitation.
But when you step into the world of the Trojan War and its aftermath, all that systemic logic just completely gets thrown out the window. So welcome to the deep dive.
It really does.
Today, we are stripping away the dusty academic veneer from one of history's most epic stories. Consider this your shortcut to understanding the entire epic. We are not just going to talk about bronze swords and shield walls today.
No, the fun stuff is the drama.
Exactly. We are getting into the petty drama, the shocking betrayals, and the deeply relatable, incredibly flawed human egos that drove this mythical narrative.
Because that human element is really what makes this story endure through the centuries. I mean, it's not just a recounting of battles. It is practically a masterclass in human psychology.
Absolutely.
It's about understanding the underlying mechanisms of why these characters made such disastrous, fascinating choices, and how those specific choices set the stage for an even wilder 10-year journey home.
So let's unpack the inciting incident, because as promised, this entire geopolitical catastrophe basically starts at a party.
The ultimate bad party.
Right. So the gods are throwing a massive wedding, and they invite literally everyone. Well, almost everyone. They deliberately exclude one person, and that is Eris, the goddess of discord and strife. Which, honestly, that seems like a pretty reasonable boundary to set.
I mean, I would invite her.
Right. You don't invite the literal embodiment of drama to a wedding.
It's a very practical guest list edit. But the psychology of exclusion is powerful. The deliberate omission is exactly what guarantees the drama that they were trying so hard to avoid.
Because she is furious at the slight.
Beyond furious. So out of pure spite, she crashes the party just long enough to toss a golden apple right into the center of the crowd. And inscribed on this apple are 3 words, just, "To the fairest."
Oh, wow.
And it rolls right between 3 incredibly powerful goddesses. You've got Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite.
Which is just a phenomenal setup for a disaster. I mean, you have 3 all-powerful beings, each absolutely certain that she is the rightful owner of this vanity prize.
Yeah, and suddenly you have this completely intractable conflict. The mechanics of ego at that level mean none of them can back down without publicly losing face.
Of course not.
So, to settle this cosmic beauty pageant, they realize they cannot judge it themselves. They need an impartial third party. So they decide to outsource the decision to a human, a young man named Paris.
Okay, wait, let me stop you right there, because the backstory of this judge is completely wild. Like, why in the world would they choose this specific guy?
Well, Paris has a really fascinating hidden identity. At this specific moment, he is just living as a humble shepherd, tending his flock on a mountain. But he is secretly the Prince of Troy.
Oh, right.
Yeah, when he was an infant, the high priest of Troy delivered this chilling prophecy. He basically said this child would one day be the cause of Troy burning to the ground.
Talk about a heavy burden for a baby.
Exactly. To prevent this, his father, the king, ordered his soldiers to kill the baby.
But they don't do it right.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
The soldiers faced the harsh reality of actually murdering an innocent infant based on, a vague mystical warning. They just couldn't bring themselves to do it. So they left him exposed on a mountain, basically assuming nature would take its course and absolve them of the direct guilt.
Wow.
But an old man found him and raised him. So Paris grows up completely oblivious to his royal blood, just living this quiet, isolated life. Until, out of nowhere, 3 glowing goddesses descend from the sky and demand he judge their beauty contest.
Which is so funny to me, because at first he literally thinks it's a joke. He's just a guy who hangs out with sheep all day, and he's wondering why these powerful beings are bothering him with their vanity project. I think he even wonders if their hormones are acting up or something.
Yeah, he is so out of his depth.
But the contest is rigged from the start. They don't just ask for his opinion, they immediately start bribing him.
Oh, absolutely. And the bribes represent the 3 core pillars of human ambition, really. Hera offers him immense political power and dominion. Athena offers him unmatched military glory and tactical brilliance for his entire life.
Huge offers.
Right, but Aphrodite takes a completely different approach. She offers him the most beautiful woman on earth.
And being a regular guy who has lived his whole life in total isolation, he doesn't really care about geopolitics or conquering nations, so he takes Aphrodite's offer. But, okay, I have to bring up a major question here.
Go for it.
If we look at this like a high school drama that somehow escalates into World War I, why in the world would all-powerful gods trust a random shepherd to settle a cosmic dispute in the first place? I mean, it just feels like terrible management.
Well, think about the concept of plausible deniability.
Okay.
The gods are fully aware that whoever loses this contest is going to be exceptionally vengeful. By outsourcing the decision to a human, they are effectively using him as a pawn to settle their own petty grievances.
Ah, so they can dodge the blame.
Exactly. They shield themselves from the direct consequences of their own vanity. Like, if Athena is furious she lost, she isn't going to declare war on Aphrodite, which would literally tear the heavens apart. She's going to take it out on Paris.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
It's a mechanism we see in modern corporate and political structures all the time, right? Divine conflict resolution via human collateral damage. Leaders delegating the most controversial decisions downward so they can keep their own hands clean.
And that collateral damage hits Earth almost immediately, doesn't it? Because there is a massive catch to Aphrodite's bribe. The most beautiful woman on Earth is Helen. And Helen is already married to Menelaus, who is the king of the Greeks.
Yeah, Aphrodite has promised a prize she doesn't actually own, which creates a severe geopolitical crisis because to fulfill her promise, she first has to get Paris into position.
Right.
She works some magic to reunite Paris with his royal family in Troy. She essentially manipulates the minds of the king and the high priest, making everyone conveniently forget that apocalyptic prophecy about this kid burning their city to the ground.
They just completely forget it.
They do. They welcome him back as a lost prince with open arms.
That is just such a stark example of cognitive dissonance.
It really highlights a deeply human flaw. I mean, we see how easily people can rationalize ignoring existential threats when they are presented with something they desperately want emotionally. The king wanted his son back, so his brain simply deleted the part about the city burning down.
So Paris is back in the royal court, and eventually he takes a diplomatic trip to visit King Menelaus of the Greeks. And conveniently, Menelaus happens to be out of town. So Paris seizes the moment and actively seduces Helen.
Yes, he does.
And the details of her rationalization are fascinating. She hesitates at first, claiming she is a respectable married woman, but then she actively starts minimizing her own agency, saying her previous lapses in judgment were just, quote, mistakes.
Which is a classic psychological defense mechanism.
Yeah.
She is minimizing past actions to justify a current, much larger transgression. She's essentially giving herself permission to cross a point of no return.
Right.
And ultimately, she sneaks off onto Paris's ship and flees to Troy.
And the reactions to this elopement are what truly set the stage for the global war. Paris has an older brother, Hector, and by all accounts, Hector is the smartest, noblest, most formidable soldier in Troy.
He really is the golden child.
Yeah, and he happens to be on the ship when he finds out what Paris did, and he is furious. He is under no illusions. He knows this means absolute war.
Hector really embodies the tragedy of duty here. He vehemently disagrees with his brother's actions, but out of strict familial loyalty, he vows to protect Paris.
Even though he knows it's a terrible idea?
Exactly. He consciously chooses to defend a toxic situation, knowing full well it will bring doom to his own people.
Now, contrast that reluctant loyalty with what happens on the Greek side. Menelaus comes home, finds his wife gone, and realizes he has been publicly humiliated on the world stage. So he immediately goes to his older brother, Agamemnon. And this is where I really have to push back on the romanticized narrative of this epic. We always hear about the face that launched 1,000 ships, this grand war for love. But Agamemnon did not care about Helen.
Not in the slightest. Agamemnon is a master opportunist.
Totally.
If we connect this to the broader patterns of history, personal indiscretions or isolated border incidents are almost always hijacked by ambitious leaders to serve a pre-existing agenda.
Right, they just need an excuse.
Exactly. Agamemnon had been dreaming of conquering the wealthy, heavily fortified city of Troy for years. He just lacked the political excuse to mobilize a unified Greek army.
So Helen's departure was basically a blank check for him. It gave him the moral high ground to launch a massive campaign of conquest. So Agamemnon decides he's going to build the biggest fleet in human history.
A massive undertaking.
But as they are assembling this huge coalition, they hit a wall. To breach the legendary defenses of Troy, they realize they need a secret weapon. They need a man named Achilles.
Achilles is the absolute linchpin of their military strategy. He is the quintessential invincible warrior. His invulnerability comes from his mother, who was a sea nymph banished by the gods for rejecting them.
Okay.
When Achilles was a baby, she dipped him in holy water, which completely altered his physiology, making him impervious to any weapon.
But she had to hold him by something to actually dip him in the water, right? So she held him by his heel, and that single point never touched the water, which created this hidden, fatal weak point.
Yes, a vulnerability known only to his mother and the divine realm. So the Greeks send Odysseus, the brilliant and cunning king of Athens, to recruit this superhuman asset.
Odysseus makes the pitch, but Achilles just flat out refuses. He basically says, the Trojans never stole my food, they never insulted me, they never burned my crops, why should I risk my life fighting them?
Which is a remarkably grounded, rational stance for a man bred for violence. He is literally asking for the actual return on investment for his bloodshed.
Right. But then his mother intervenes. She reveals this stark, binary prophecy about his future. She tells him, if you go to this war, you will die on the battlefield, but your name will be immortalized in history, and you will achieve eternal military glory.
The ultimate legacy.
Yeah, but if you stay home, you will live a long, happy, peaceful life. But within a generation, no one will ever remember you existed. She bluntly tells him to do the right thing, essentially calling him an idiot, and pushes him toward the battlefield. And, well, he chooses glory.
It is the ultimate tragic bargain, and it speaks to a very specific human obsession with legacy. Achilles willingly trades his tangible, breathing life, his peace, and his future family, all for a concept, immortality in the minds of others.
It's wild to think about.
It really forces you to look at the mechanics of ambition. Like, what is the actual value of being revered by people who haven't even been born yet if the mandatory entry fee is your own destruction?
It honestly reminds me of drafting a wildly temperamental star athlete for a championship run.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
You bring this guy onto the team, and he completely changes the entire dynamic. He demands special treatment, he ignores the playbook, he disrespects the coach. But the organization tolerates the toxicity because he is the only one who guarantees you the trophy.
That is an excellent framework for understanding Achilles' role in the Greek camp. He is a necessary nightmare. And that massive ego, that constant demand for reverence, almost derails the entire war before the major battles even begin.
Yeah, so the Greeks finally arrive on the beaches of Troy. They sack the surrounding countryside. They're taking resources and slaves. And Agamemnon, wanting to assert his absolute dominance as the supreme commander, decides to publicly disrespect Achilles. He confiscates Achilles' prize, a captured slave girl.
Which is just a catastrophic failure in leadership. Agamemnon prioritizes his own immediate status over the cohesion of his entire army.
And Achilles' reaction is completely disproportionate. He is so deeply insulted by the slight that he just quits. He gathers his armor, retreats to his tent, and categorically refuses to fight, leaving the Greek army to basically get slaughtered.
Just sulking in his tent.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Paris, the architect of this entire disaster, suddenly decides to grow a conscience. He tries to fix his mess by challenging Menelaus to a one-on-one duel. The terms are simple. Winner takes Helen, the war ends today, and everyone goes home.
And on paper, that is a perfectly sensible geopolitical solution.
Right.
Limit the casualties to the two men who actually have a grievance.
But the reality of combat sets in quickly. Menelaus is a massive, battle-hardened veteran. Paris is a guy who grew up watching sheep. Menelaus absolutely wipes the floor with him.
He's not even close.
Right. He is inches away from dealing the fatal blow in front of tens of thousands of cheering and horrified soldiers. And this is where Hector's tragic flaw surfaces again. Hector cannot bear to watch his younger brother die, so he breaks the sacred, agreed-upon treaty, jumps into the middle of the duel, and kills Menelaus to save Paris.
That single moment completely shatters the illusion of rules in warfare. Once the sacred treaty is broken, the conflict devolves from a structured dispute into an uncontained bloodbath.
Agamemnon just loses his mind and orders a full-scale assault. And because Achilles is sitting in his tent, sulking over a blow to his ego, the Trojans actually gain the upper hand. They push the Greek forces all the way back to the beaches. They are literally burning the Greek ships.
It's complete disaster for the Greeks.
So desperate that Odysseus convinces Agamemnon to give the slave girl back, along with massive treasures, just to appease Achilles, but Achilles still refuses to fight.
He is entirely paralyzed by his own wounded pride. He has completely lost sight of the war, his comrades, and his own legacy at this point.
So his most loyal friend, Patroclus, realizes the army is about to be annihilated. He takes matters into his own hands. Patroclus steals Achilles' iconic armor and runs out onto the battlefield to rally the terrified Greek troops.
A very brave but very dangerous move.
Yeah, because from a distance, everyone, including the Trojans, thinks the invincible Achilles has returned. So Hector engages him in brutal close-quarters combat and actually manages to strike a fatal blow.
And this is the pivotal psychological turning point of the entire epic.
Because Hector pulls off the helmet, expecting to look into the eyes of his great rival Achilles. Instead, he realizes in absolute horror that he has killed Patroclus, a man he considers a relative child in terms of warfare.
You can really analyze the devastating realization Hector experiences in that moment. He knows instantly that he has crossed an invisible line from which there is zero possibility of return.
Yeah, he knows he messed up.
He hasn't just killed a soldier. He has awakened the sleeping giant. He has given Achilles a deeply personal reason to fight.
Awaken doesn't even begin to cover it. Achilles goes completely mad with grief. He rides alone to the heavily fortified gates of Troy and just screams for Hector to come out.
It's terrifying.
Hector, knowing full well he is outmatched and basically going to his death, steps out. He actually tries to negotiate, to apologize. He tries to explain it was a tragic error in the fog of war and asks that whoever dies, their body be returned to their family.
A very noble request.
But Achilles refuses to hear a single word of it. He brutally slaughters Hector. And then he pierces Hector's heels, ties him to the back of a chariot, and drags his mutilated body through the dirt around the city walls. He does this repeatedly, right in front of Hector's screaming wife, his aging parents, and Paris.
It is the definition of absolute, unchecked savagery. All military objective is gone, replaced entirely by sadistic vengeance.
Reading the mechanics of that scene, I honestly found myself wondering if there are actually any good guys left in this story. I mean, you start off the narrative primed to view Achilles as the heroic protagonist, but by this point, he has devolved into an absolute monster.
That reaction is exactly what the narrative is designed to evoke. It sources a critical examination of the nature of warfare itself. The story brilliantly juxtaposes Hector's profound, tragic nobility. A man fighting exclusively to protect his family and his profoundly flawed brother with Achilles' raw, narcissistic emotions.
This is a huge contrast.
It actively strips away the romanticized heroism of battle. What you are left with is the understanding that prolonged conflict ultimately burns away nobility, leaving only trauma and vengeance. The supposed hero is simply the one left standing at the end, regardless of the atrocities they had to commit to ensure they were the survivor.
But then, right after this peak display of brutality, the narrative pivots to what might be the most surprisingly emotional moment in the whole story.
It's a beautiful moment.
In the dead of night, the king of Troy, an elderly man, sneaks out of his heavily fortified city. He crosses enemy lines, bypasses the guards, and walks right into Achilles' tent.
He walks into the lair of the man who just spent days desecrating his son's corpse.
Exactly. The king drops to his knees, kisses the hands of the man who murdered Hector, and begs for his son's body so he can give him a proper burial. He looks at Achilles and says, "You have made me do what no man has ever done. Kiss the hands of my son's killer."
It's just gut-wrenching.
And Achilles, this raging, blood-soaked monster, suddenly breaks. He looks at the grieving father and is deeply moved by the older man's nobility and sheer desperation. He agrees to return the body, and he even grants a 3-month truce for the city of Troy to mourn their fallen prince.
It's a fleeting, devastatingly beautiful act of grace. It serves as a reminder that their shared humanity still exists, just buried deep under a decade of violence and ego.
Naturally, Agamemnon is furious that Achilles unilaterally negotiated a secret peace deal. But Odysseus, the brilliant tactician, sees an opportunity. He uses this quiet 3-month pause to engineer the ultimate deception.
The creation of the infamous Trojan horse.
Yes. Let's look at the mechanics of how they pull this off, because it requires massive psychological manipulation. They need the Trojans to genuinely believe the Greeks have given up and sailed home. So, they fake a massive plague. They smear mud and ashes on the bodies of dead soldiers to make it look like a horrific sickness wiped out the camp. They sail their entire naval fleet just out of sight, hiding behind a narrow strait. And they leave behind this massive, hollow, wooden horse on the empty beach, secretly filled with their most elite fighters, including Achilles.
It is a psychological trap. intricately tailored to exploit a city that is utterly exhausted by a 10-year siege.
When the 3-month truce is up, the Trojans cautiously venture out of their gates. They see the abandoned camp, the fake plague victims, and this giant wooden horse. The king and the high priest are ecstatic. But here is the darkest irony of the whole story.
Oh, this part is amazing.
Paris, the guy who caused this entire geopolitical disaster because he couldn't control his impulses, is the only one who looks at the horse and uses basic common sense. He sarcastically tells the king, "Let's burn it. The gods wouldn't use free shipping to leave a gift right at our front door."
The architect of their ruin becomes the solitary voice of reason. He's the only one who accurately assesses the final blow coming their way.
Isn't it wild that he of all people saw through it?
It really is.
But the high priest aggressively overrules him. He insists it is a sacred offering from the gods and that dragging it inside the impenetrable city walls will secure divine favor forever. So they actually break down part of their own defenses to bring it inside.
This moment is a textbook study in the psychology of victory blindness. We need to understand how cognitive dissonance operates here.
Okay, how so?
Well, the Trojans were so desperate to believe that their 10-year nightmare was over, they were so desperate to believe they had finally won a war of attrition, that they allowed their desire for relief to completely override their critical thinking.
They just wanted it to be true.
Exactly. They rationalized ignoring massive, obvious red flags because the alternative reality that the war was still happening and they were still in danger was simply too painful for their minds to accept.
And they paid the ultimate price for that blindness. That night, while the citizens of Troy are celebrating their fabricated victory, the Greek operatives slip out of the hollow belly of the horse. They neutralize the guards and open the main gates for the returning Greek fleet.
And then it's just over.
They systematically slaughter the citizens, burn the city down to its foundations, and both the king of Troy and Agamemnon die in the absolute chaos of the raid. The impenetrable city falls from the inside.
But the victors, those who orchestrated the massacre, do not get a happy ending.
Far from it. During the burning of the city, Achilles realizes his slave girl, the one whose confiscation caused him to quit fighting earlier, is somewhere trapped in the chaos. He actually wades back into the burning city to save her. But Paris is waiting in the shadows.
Right where he needs to be.
Guided by the divine intervention of Apollo, Paris draws his bow and shoots an arrow through the smoke. It hits Achilles directly in his one single weak spot, his heel.
The prophecy delivered by his mother a decade earlier is fulfilled on the ashes of Troy.
But Paris doesn't stop there. After severing the heel, he shoots 6 more arrows directly into Achilles' chest. I was thinking about the sheer volume of hatred required for that. If Achilles were a company going public on the stock market, he would have issued fewer shares than the number of arrows he just took to the torso.
That's a great way to put it.
It was absolute undeniable overkill to make sure the invincible man stayed down.
It is the physical manifestation of a decade of hatred and fear poured into a single target.
In the confusion, Paris somehow manages to escape the burning city. He flees back into the mountains where he was raised, taking Helen, Hector's widow, and the slave girl with him. As for the Greeks, well, they won. Odysseus briefly rules over the smoldering ashes of Troy and then packs up his ships for what should be a routine 3-day journey back across the sea to his wife and son in Athens.
But he forgot to factor in the divine ego of the entities who rule those waters.
Exactly. During the brutal sack of Troy, the Greeks destroyed sacred temples and deeply disrespected the altars of the gods. The god of the seas, who we can humorously refer to as Hajj Sunshine, based on his incredibly vindictive disposition, decides he is not going to let this slide. He decides to punish Odysseus for his overwhelming hubris.
So the routine journey home becomes its own legendary psychological punishment.
A simple 3-day sailing trip turns into a brutal 10-year nightmare. Odysseus and his crew face terrifying giants, powerful witches, and spells that literally erase his crew's memory of their homes.
It's one thing after another.
When Odysseus finally miraculously reaches his homeland 20 years after he initially left for the war, he arrives as an unrecognizable, battered vagabond dressed in rags, and he walks into his own estate only to find it entirely overrun by aggressive opportunists trying to steal his throne, forcefully marry his wife, and displace or kill his son.
Which perfectly synthesizes the underlying thesis of this entire narrative. The violent conclusion of one war merely serves as the incubator for the next great struggle.
Yeah, never really ends.
What this epic is really trying to communicate is that surviving the battlefield is only half the battle. Surviving the journey back to normalcy, processing the immense trauma, and fighting to reclaim the life you left behind that is the real epic of the human experience.
So we've tracked an incredible arc today. We went from a golden apple tossed into a wedding reception to an entirely burned out civilization, and finally to a king lost at sea for a decade battling giants just to get to his front door. And looking at all those dominoes fall brings up a really provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up.
I'm curious what you think about this.
Throughout this entire epic, we are constantly told that the gods pulled the strings. The narrative insists they whispered in ears, they guided the arrows, they demanded the blood
Right,
sacrifices.
the gods are always to blame.
But think about the mechanics of the story for a second. If you were to remove the gods from this story entirely, every single catastrophic event can still be explained purely by deeply flawed human psychology.
Ego, lust, pride.
Greed, vengeance, victory blindness. Exactly. So, were the gods ever really directing the fate of Troy? Or did humanity just invent the concept of meddling gods as a convenient way to avoid taking responsibility for the terrible things they choose to do to each other?
That is a fascinating question to leave on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And seriously, think twice about your wedding guest list.